I'm not saying it is the strong delusion. I'm asking if it is. It's a pretty good candidate when you go through it. I just did a search the other day on my phone. I was just sitting there. What is the speed of this alleged orbit? Because I keep hearing this all the time. Well, no, circle. He's talking about that's the circle of the orbit of the Earth. That's what that whole video was in response to. And I'm like, okay, what is the speed of the Earth going around the sun, supposedly? And it's cleverly disguised as 18.5 miles per second when you search for it. 18.5 miles per second. So I'm like, 18.5 times 60 seconds times 60 minutes, 66,600 miles per hour. Interesting. Supposedly, this globe that we're on is 25,000 miles in circumference, which amounts to 8 inches per mile squared is the math. 8 inches, of course, being 0.666 of a foot. 10 miles being 66.666 feet. 100 being, you're getting to see a pattern here. The tilt of the Earth, I looked that up. Okay, the tilt of the Earth, 23.5 degrees, 23.4, depending on who you read. The sources that I looked at were government sources. They were saying 23.4. 23.4 off of center. If you have a 90-degree angle, 90 subtract 23.4, 66.6. It's probably all just a coincidence. Maybe it is. This other guy who believes in the globe, I know I'm crazy. I told you, don't believe me. Remember the slide with the tinfoil hat? Or let's just say things that make you go, This other guy who believes in the globe, it created this graphic, and I saw it on his website, godtype.com, and he was saying all of these distances in nautical miles from various points of on Antarctica to the Jerusalem, to the Vatican obelisk, to Washington, are 6,660 nautical miles. I'm like, okay, whatever. Godtype.com. It's up in the top corner there. He believes in the globe, and the tap dance he does around this to say that, that's whatever. I'm like, okay, dude, yeah, sure. The number of the beast is 666. So, most of us, the understanding we have of our globe comes from this organization right here, or organizations affiliated with them, or organizations that promote their work. Like the picture you've seen in every one of your textbooks from Apollo 17. Should we trust this organization? I didn't put all the slides in here that I wanted to. I had to cut it down for time. But just look into Jack Parsons, JPL. He's the founder of Jet Propulsion Laboratory. That dude was a hardcore Satanist occultist. He was the disciple of Aleister Crowley. You guys know who he is? Who fashioned himself as the beast. He referred to himself as the beast. And Parsons was his disciple next to, who's the heir apparent. And he gets out there in the area that became known as Area 51. He's working together with L. Ron Hubbard, another freak that creates a cult called Scientology. They're out there doing ceremonial sex magic rituals out there to try to bring about the spirit of Babylon. That's what leads into NASA. And then when you get to the formation of NASA, you got more than 100 or 1,600 Nazis escaped the judgment that they deserved and found refuge in America. A group of 104 German rocket scientists, including Wernher von Braun, Ludwig Roth, Arthur Rudolph, are pictured here at Fort Bliss, Texas in 1946. Many had worked to develop the V-2 rocket at Peenemünde, Germany, and came to the United States after World War II, subsequently working on various rockets, including the Explorer 1 space rocket and, of course, the Saturn V rocket at NASA. These are the people who founded NASA, and then they put Freemasons in charge of the whole thing. You look at the heads of NASA that were like 32nd, 33-degree Masons, and then why is it that all of our astronauts have to be Freemasons or associated with Freemasons or have parents that were Freemasons or be in the military? That's the foundation of the organization that so many are putting so much trust in. What does the scripture say about the commandments, right? First one, thou shalt have no other gods before me. So what do? All of their missions are named after gods. Mercury, right? You got Gemini, follow that. The Gemini missions. And then, of course, we have Apollo. It's interesting that only 6 missions allegedly made it to the moon with 2 men walking on the moon. 6 times 2 is 12. So we have the 12 apostles of Apollo are the ones spreading the message that here's a picture of Earth from the moon. When you look into Apollo, specifically those that claim to land on the moon, I could spend an entire weekend going through that stuff. But there are a lot of resources that you can look into. One of them being aulis.com, AULIS. These are PhD level people going through the footage, going through, looking at the pictures, looking at stuff, and just shredding the Apollo missions. I was invited to speak in Amsterdam several months back, almost a year ago now, I think. I can't remember when it was exactly, but a high-profile musician, let's just say, started looking at some of my materials on Flat Earth. As a result, he started looking into the Torah. As a result, he started attending my virtual house church. Now, this is a guy that's really up there in the hip hop genre, which is like so opposite, like who I am. I'm the white guy, can't, dance or, do anything. So this other rapper, B.O.B., I think was his name, started becoming vocal about Flat Earth. And so, this guy that I'm not going to mention his name, but he saw what that guy was looking into. He's like, what is this? So he looked in that, and then he stumbled on my stuff, stumbled on Torah, started studying the Torah, started attending my virtual house church, then realized he needed to get saved, got saved. And they said, well, if I'm going to get baptized, I'm going to do it right. So he got on a plane and flew to Israel and got baptized in the Jordan River. And he told me, I'm sitting in this very expensive car, with Sheila, going, how does this happen? He goes, I kid you not. I said, I came up out of being baptized. And he said, the only word I got was bring Rob Skiba to Amsterdam. I'm like, okay. So, and that was just so, God has got such a crazy sense of humor. I'm giving this presentation in a venue called the Milky Way. All right. Now, the Milky Way venue had multiple different stages where concerts were taking place, like 5 different concerts taking place. And if you could have seen the marquee, right? Like the marquee is like all these yo-yo hip hop, dudes. And there's like my goofy picture from Ski. So I'm in this place, I'm talking like this stuff. And it was pretty soundproof, so we couldn't hear what was outside and stuff. But every time they opened the doors, like all this pot smoke comes in, and like all this music, and I'm like, what? How does this happen? But I'm like, okay, God, whatever. He called me specifically to talk about the stuff that I've been talking about this weekend, so that's what I did. And the crazy thing was, he got booked on a Tonight Show kind of thing that night, that he's under contract with record labels and stuff, and he had to do that. So he couldn't even attend the conference that he paid for Sheila and I to go to, but a whole lot of other people did. And it was really interesting because I had known about this, that the moon rocks were first exposed as frauds by them in the Netherlands. Now, the Apollo astronauts went around and the big publicity tour at the time, back in the 60s, giving various people in positions of royalty and whatnot, leadership, moon rocks. Well, they decided at one point they wanted to take an insurance policy out on it. So, of course, as part of doing the insurance policy thing, they start analyzing it, and they found out the thing's petrified wood. Now, I'm at this venue, the Milky Way, and I find out that this museum is literally like a couple of blocks down the road. So I'm going to go there. So Sheila and I went there, and we get to the information desk, and they weren't even aware that they had the thing. I'm like, this is supposed to be one of the most significant achievements of all of humanity. You would think you'd have that center display with, like a halo right over it, and the angels floating over it, pointing at it. Like, look at what we did, No, they had it tucked away in a warehouse somewhere, like in Indiana Jones, They said that. It's tucked away in a warehouse. You have to get special appointment and blah, blah, blah. She had to actually look it up. They had it. But I just thought it was rather poetic that here I'm, the whole series of events that led me there, what I was talking about, and that was right down the street. They exposed it as a fraud. And just so happened, if you go look it up, that Wernher von Braun and company were down in Antarctica in the late 1960s, prior to us allegedly going there in 69, looking for moon rocks. You can look that up for yourself. Going to Antarctica, looking for moon rocks. So first of all, at that point, we hadn't even been there yet. So how do you know, if you find a rock, that it's from the moon? It's not like you go, oh, made on the moon. Cool. All right, let's categorize that one. Oh, this one's made on Mars. Put that one over here. There's no way you're going to know that. And we're allegedly in a space race against the Russians, right? We got to beat the Russians. They're going, Sputnik, right? So if we're in this big space race against the Russians and we got to get to space and get up there and, Gary or whatever is floating around up there, oh, we got to walk in space. Why are you down on a vacation in Antarctica? Very suspicious. I show this picture a lot of times to people and say, hey, this is associated with the Apollo moon landings. Can you tell me what region of the moon that is? People give various guesses. Some of you have probably seen it, so you know where I'm going with this. Well, it's not the moon. That's Arizona. It's where they, Cinder Lake, Arizona, where they blew up Arizona to look like the moon. In fact, you can still see remnants of it on Google Earth today. I recently went there because I had already done all the presentations, and I was in Arizona not too long ago. I'm like, I'm going there. And if you saw the video I posted on YouTube, it's called Rob Skiba Walks on the Moon. I shot a little selfie of myself, there. Maybe that's why, you had the before and after. Before, these guys were like, ooh, yeah, ooh. And then when you have the press conference, when they come back, allegedly coming back from the most significant thing human beings have ever done, ever, that's the way they looked. And if you watch the actual presentation, they don't, look, man, if I was on the moon, if I had ever walked on the moon, I'd still be floating when I came back here. You'd have to tie a tether to me. So I didn't fly away because I'd be spazzed. I'm pretty hyper anyway. I'd be spazzed, jacked out of my mind for the rest of my life. These guys look like their dog was shot. They just found out Santa Claus isn't real. The Easter Bunny, They were so, to me, honestly, they looked like good patriotic men that hated the fact that they had to lie. That's, I'm maybe reading too much into it. Fair enough. But watch it for yourself and see what you think. But so if that stuff didn't happen, then neither did this. This is Apollo 17 that allegedly took this picture. And that's the only picture we've had until we get into much later. That was in 1972. We have all these pictures put out by NASA. Which one is it? They're always different. And if you look at these, a lot of these, they'll tell you right off the bat, especially the 2002 one, the most famous one. This is a composite. It's created in Photoshop. The one in 2002 right there, I went through that with a fine-tooth comb, if so to speak, in Photoshop and showed you where they're using the Photoshop clone tool to replicate clouds all over the place. It's manufactured. That same, they redid the old Star Trek episodes, the 1960 ones. They had all cheesy special effects because they had basically the catering budget of today's TV shows to do what they did. So they redid the special effects. So all the planet shots where they're going around the Earth or other planets or whatever were all redone. They redid the special effects. Well, there are several episodes of the old 1960 Star Trek where they went back in time or whatnot or found another planet that looked exactly like Earth, and they used that same Earth. And the way you could tell it is there's a cloud formation right there. It's like a backwards C. It's like a backwards C just off the East Coast. And that is a separate layer in the 3D model. So it's not always over the East Coast of the United States. You'll see it in other places. But look for that backward C because it shows up all over the place. So it makes me wonder, was NASA created to hide God? Now, I've seen this meme being passed around on Facebook and other places that the Hebrew word NASA means to deceive. Yes and no. Like the letter shin in the middle, I don't know if you can see it from where you are, it has a little dot over the right side of the shin. That depending on where that dot is, depends on how you pronounce the word. You got the nun, shin, and aleph right there. When it's over the right side, it's pronounced more like nasha. It's pronounced with a sh sound. When the dot is over the left, it's with a s sound. The first time it appears in our scriptures is in Genesis 3 when the serpent beguiled me. Nasha. Same word, just pronounced slightly different. The second time it shows up is when Cain receives his judgment, and it says it's more than I can bear in Genesis 4:13, and that's when the dot is over the left side. And so that's when it's pronounced NASA or NASA. So how interesting, the context in which both first appear, Nasha in reference to Eve being deceived by the serpent, and NASA in reference to Cain's punishment after killing his brother Abel. The word in that case, it's translated there as bear, but it also means to lift up. So I'm going, lifting up to deceive? Maybe. Oh, don't be silly. You can trust us. If that's true, what's the motivation? That's what I always hear. Why would they lie? What's the motivation, Rob? Well, this is just my thoughts on it. First, get people to doubt Yahuwah's word by destroying the very foundation of our Bible, Genesis, specifically the creation account. Second, Set up a new paradigm where God is out and science is in. Evolution removes Yahuwah from the equation. When evolution finally runs its course and becomes utterly bankrupt, introduce the idea of intelligent design, but deny the true designer his due credit and place it rather on ancient aliens. 4, promote the ancient alien theme as much as possible in all forms of media by perpetuating the concept of Earth as a tiny blue marble, insignificant blue marble, by the way, orbiting an average sun in an average galaxy among trillions of other galaxies in an ever-expanding universe. With so much potential for life to exist in such a vast expanse, the idea of ancient aliens or ancient scientists, alien scientists, being our creators seems a lot more plausible over time and heavy indoctrination. The stage is set for our alien creators to return and bestow upon us their miraculous signs and wonders in order to convince us all the more that all religions are false. We then put our trust in them. Finally, when Christ does return, we are all convinced that he is the enemy and our united world gathers together to make war with him. That's just my thoughts on it. About what, if there is a grand conspiracy, what would the motivation be? Those are my thoughts on that. So let's tie it all together now. Tying it all together, a most peculiar timeline. So we have God creates the world in 6 literal days, describing essentially a snow globe enclosed world cosmology. Shortly after Adam and Eve are placed in the Garden of Eden, a serpent deceives them into disobeying Yahuwah, and a seed war begins. Cain kills his brother Abel. Seth replaces Abel, and the messianic seed is to come from his line. Plan B, corrupt the seed line. The Genesis 6 experiment occurs. Over a 1,200-year time period, all flesh becomes corrupted through various forms of Nephilim hybridization. Yahuwah destroys the whole world with a flood, preserving only those who made it onto Noah's ark. The whole earth is populated by Noah's 3 sons. In 1908 AM, or a year since creation, Nimrod is born. Abram is born in 1948 AM, and the seed war continues with 2 human players on the cosmic chessboard, Nimrod versus Abraham. Nimrod builds a tower in order to reach into heaven and ultimately attempts to kill Yahuwah. His plan fails when Yahuwah confounds the languages. People disperse, all talking about the same guy, Nimrod, and now only with different languages, different names. Hence, he becomes the rebellious god of this world. Abraham produces Isaac, who produces Jacob, who is the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. The stage is now set for the entire biblical narrative. All of that's within the first 12 chapters of Genesis, which ultimately leads to Messiah and his final victory in the cosmic seed war. Now let's drill down to more along our timeline. Nimrod, again, was born in 1908 AM, year since creation. Just so happens to be, if you flash forward to 1908 AD, Ernest Shackleton boarded a ship called the Nimrod, and he heads down to Antarctica on the Nimrod expedition. Now, in the biblical account, Nimrod went up to try to get into the firmament. In 1908, if this model is true, it looks like they went out to get to the firmament towards the outer regions. Now, people are like, well, if it's flat Earth, how come we don't fall off the edge? Well, because it just so happens to be, if you Google coastline of Antarctica, you see 200 to 300 foot ice walls. That would be the outside of the circle, so to speak. If you look into the Enochian account of what happened to him when Enoch was not, for God took him, where did he take him? Joshua says he was taken in a place of snow and ice. So I'm going, okay, that's interesting. So Nimrod heads down to, Shackleton heads down on the Nimrod expedition. Many more Antarctic expeditions soon follow. In 1931, a guy named Auguste Piccard, who was a scientist, shoots himself up into the stratosphere. He got to nearly 52,000 feet, first guy to get that high, in a metal ball hanging from a balloon, and comes back describing, for Popular Science magazine no less, the Earth as a flat disk with upturned edges. That was his description of what he saw. During World War II, the Nazis become obsessed with the occult and Antarctica. Just look into the Nazis and what they were doing down there. After World War II, the rest of the world suddenly becomes obsessed with Antarctica as well. Enter Admiral Byrd. He's an interesting character who allegedly flew to the North Pole region in the late 1940s, and he came back claiming to have found the entrance to Inner Earth, Agartha. Now, this is a highly decorated, he's the youngest admiral in the U.S. military. Comes back talking about this in his diaries. The Babylon Working I told you about earlier takes place in 1946, along with L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. JPL founder Jack Parsons, who was a disciple of Aleister Crowley, engages in ritualistic sex magic in order to incarnate a moon child with the Scarlet Woman named Babylon. Byrd then goes to Antarctica, leading Operation High Jump in 1947. Why is it called Operation High Jump? Well, you got to jump up. You got to get over that big ice wall there. What else happened in 1947? Lots of interesting things happened in 1947. Among them, the founding of the International Monetary Fund, the start of Jewish immigration to the land of Israel. A young Bedouin shepherd discovers the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's when he chucks a rock in there, here's a crack, goes in there, finds the scrolls. And then we have the alleged UFO crash near Roswell, New Mexico, all happening at that same time period. A nation calling itself Israel is established in 1948. MK Ultra begins early in the 1950s, officially runs from 1953 to 1973, coincidentally the same time as the space program. If you know anything about MK Ultra, that's all about government-sponsored mind control. In fact, if you go back to the press conference, you see those three guys from Apollo 11 looking very depressed, and then Neil Armstrong says, and now he says something to the effect of, now we'll view the slides from our mission so that we can reacquaint ourselves with what happened. Look, if I just went to the moon, I would have remembered every detail of every second of everything I did forever. I don't need slides to tell me what I did, you know. And when the slideshow comes on, all of a sudden these guys who are so like just bummed out, it looked like, become very animated and start like, woo. It was almost as if they were triggered in MK Ultra.
The flight, as you know, started promptly. And I think that was characteristic of all the events of the flight. The Saturn gave us one magnificent ride, both into Earth orbit and on a trajectory to the moon. Our memory of that actually differs little from the reports that you have all heard from those previous Saturn V flights, and the previous flights served us well in preparation for this flight in the boost as well as the subsequent phases. We would like to skip directly to the translunar coast phase and remind ourselves of the chain of events, that long chain of events that actually permitted a landing, starting with the undockings, or the transposition and docking sequence. In the final phases of descent, after a number of program alarms, we looked at the landing area and found a very large crater just in the very left top corner of the picture. The camera is located in the right window and looks to the right, and it just barely sees this boulder field we're passing over right now. We're at 400 feet and those boulders are about 10 feet across. This was the area which we decided we would not go into, extended the range downrange, and saw this crater, which we passed over, this 80-foot crater, in the final phases of descent and later took some pictures of.
Is it a coincidence that MK Ultra was going through its height of its program at the same time as the Apollo program? I don't think so. Operation Deep Freeze takes place in Antarctica 1955 through 56. Sputnik is launched in late 1957. Both NASA and DARPA are formed in 1958. DARPA is the Defense Agency's research projects. That's where they do all the black budget projects to create super soldiers and all kinds of other things. DARPA and NASA created the same year. This is like after Operation Deep Freeze, all these people go down to Antarctica and then something happens. Everybody pulls out of there and they decide they have to set up the Antarctic Treaty. And the treaty was finally signed into effect in '61. The treaty says you can only go there under the express guidelines of this treaty. So yeah, you can go there. There's some flat earthers saying you can't go there. That's not true. You can go there, but only under the express guidelines of the treaty, which means you can't just go, take a boat, go there and just go exploring Antarctica. You're going to go only where you're allowed to go. And so all of this it's setting up a very interesting timeline. At least, if you're wearing a tinfoil hat like I am, it's all kind of going, oh, wait a minute. This is really kind of wild here. And it gets worse when you get to Operation Dominic and Project Fishbowl, where they launched 31 nukes in 1962. Many of them were high-altitude nukes. Operation Fishbowl. Kennedy's speech, 1962, kicks off the space race leading to Apollo. Star Trek debuts in 1966 and goes right through 69. Apollo 11 allegedly lands on the moon in 1969. In 1972, coincidentally, just before MK Ultra officially terminated. And the Omega Plan kicks in shortly thereafter. I'm not going to go into the Omega Plan. I've got a 20-minute video on YouTube if you want to check that out. That describes what I consider to be the end times plan in great detail. Now, the next video you're going to see is a video that I put together after I discovered what was really going on with Operation Fishbowl. Now, with the tinfoil hat on, playing conspiracy theory here, the flat earthers are claiming, and I think it's a reasonable claim, that, you know, if that model is true, then we know we have a circle, the circle of the earth as described in the Bible, surrounded by Antarctica, the outer rim, that has a 200 or 300 foot ice wall, cliff, that keeps everything in, hence Operation High Jump. You got to get over that, right? So it looks like, at least from the flat earther perspective, that probably during Operation Deep Freeze, they may have found the edge of the dome, presumably anywhere from 800 to 1,200 miles inland from the coast. Then everybody pulls out, signs this treaty, says nobody can go back except under the express guidelines of the international community that signed the treaty. So then all of a sudden the United States and Russia engaged in these high altitude nuclear tests, and the United States calls theirs Operation Dominic, within which we have Operation Fishbowl. Now, hold that thought. This is all happening. If you go and look on the Operation Dominic entry, you see the different dates. We're 1962. This is the early part of 1962. We're talking May. I mean, look at all these bombs going off. 25 April, 1962, 27 April, 2 May, 4 May, 6 May, 8 May, 9 May, 11 May, 11 May, 12 May, 14 May, 19, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is all before President Kennedy's "Let's go out in the space" speech. But I think a lot of people don't realize that our first stop wasn't the moon. Even before we went to the moon, they were sending probes all of a sudden after all of this. Okay, keep the timeline in mind. Operation High Jump, Operation Deep Freeze, Bird dies, NASA's founded, Antarctic Treaty signed, Operation Dominic and Fishbowl take effect. And if you notice during President Kennedy's speech, he was talking about that they've already got probes headed to Venus. Wait a minute. We're already sending stuff to Venus and Mars? We haven't even been to the moon yet. And so I was looking into that, and on planetary.org/explore/space topics /space missions to Venus-Mercury.html. And you can go through this site. It starts sort of from the bottom up. As early as February 4th, 1961, they're sending a probe, Sputnik 7. Russia sent this probe to check out Venus. The final stage of the rocket carrying Sputnik 7 into orbit failed, and the spacecraft was unable to achieve the necessary trajectory to carry it onto Venus. Then Venera 1, Russia, sends out another probe February 12, 1961. They lost communications while it was on its way to Venus. Then NASA sends up Mariner 1, July 22nd, 1962. Now, that's right in the middle of Dominic and Fishbowl, that we sent out a probe to go check out Venus. It veered off course and was destroyed by ground controllers. So then Russia sends up another one, Sputnik 19, August 25th, 1962. The spacecraft made it into orbit, but the rocket's last stage failed, and Sputnik 19 was unable to achieve its Venus trajectory and re-entered the Earth's atmosphere 3 days later. NASA, August 27th, 1962, sends its probe. It says Mariner 2 was the first spacecraft to successfully fly by Venus at an altitude of 34,773 kilometers. The spacecraft discovered ground temperatures, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so This is during the time period that between August 27th, 1962 and December 14th, 1962, that we had President Kennedy's speech on September 12th, 1962. So that's what he's referring to. We've already got stuff out there and you can read about the other ones that were, checking out Venus, I guess Mercury also, and attempted probes going to Mars. Now, this is all before we've even been to the moon. So it appears that whatever happened in Antarctica, everybody got kind of maybe nervous or excited or whatever and said, okay, what is the deal? We've looked through telescopes. We've seen our so-called neighbors, Venus and Mars, through telescopes. Our assumption is the solar system is, set up in the Copernican model. And, but yet maybe they found a dome and they started to question all that. So the first thing they do is send out probes to go, wait a minute, what in the world? If we're in a dome, how high does this thing go? So they start launching high altitude nuclear bombs. And if you look at the videos on Operation Fishbowl and Starfish Prime and all those high altitude tests, it looks like they're hitting something up there. At least from a conspiratorial tinfoil hat wearing perspective, that's what it looks like. Now, this is what blew my mind. You can read more on all that if you'd like. To get caught up to speed on what's going on there. So I go to Lubbock and I'm doing this conference out there at Jared Cressman's father's church, Pastor Dan Cressman. And we get to talking about this whole issue of the flat earth stuff. And he goes, do you know what the name Dominic means? And I said, no. He says, you talk about Operation Fishbowl, but check this out. I'm going to take you to, I'll put the screen share back up here. Take you to a one of those name websites. I like using behindthename.com. Look up the name Dominic. And again, let's just double check it here. Dominic, D-O-M-I-N-I-C. Look up Dominic, D-O-M-I-N-I-C. From the late Latin name Dominicus, meaning of the Lord. Fishbowl was part of Operation Dominic. It looks like they are sending high altitude nuclear bombs to test the fishbowl of the Lord, i.e., the firmament. Yeah, this is definitely one of those things to make you go, He says we already have probes on the way to Venus and Mars. Venus and Mars, 62. We didn't even allegedly go to the moon until 69. The moon is allegedly 250,000 miles away. Venus and Mars, they're way past that. We had just, as human beings, we had just basically put a beach ball up in space. Sputnik. You look at that. Ooh, that was like a huge major achievement in 57. And all of a sudden, by 61, 62, we supposedly have probes on the way to Venus and Mars, and we haven't even been to the moon yet? And if you listen to the speech, he mentions it, but it's just kind of you don't even think about it. But I went on a NASA website, or a space website, whatever it was their official mission log, and it shows you. These are all the things that both the United States and Russia, immediately, after whatever they did in Antarctica, the first thing they do is start sending stuff out to Venus and Mars and start sending high-altitude nuclear bombs up into the sky. Again, if they're trying to avoid a conspiracy, they're not helping with their actions or the names that they're using.